So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the seminar of the CSH, the Centre de Sciences Humaines. My name is Laurence Gauthier and I'm a historian here. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome Corinne Lefèvre, who is a CNRS research fellow and a member of the Center for South Asian and Himalayan Studies, the CESA, which was earlier known as the Center of South Asian Studies, the CEIAS. She received her PhD from the EHESS, taught at the INALCO in Paris before joining the CNRS. Corinne's work, as some of you or many of you would know, focuses on Mughal India, but also she also looks at the connections with the other two major polities of early modern Muslim Asia, the Safavid Iran and Chingizid Khanate of Central Asia. Her work has been published in several prestigious journals, like the Annal Journal, the Indian Economic and Social History Review, the Medieval Journal, and Religions of South Asia. Corinne also co-edited a book in French entitled Cosmopolitisms in South Asia on 16th and 18th century. And she also co-edited a special issue in English entitled Cultural Dialogue in South Asia and Beyond, Narratives, Images, and Community. And I think we have the co-author here, the co-editor here, which was published in the Journal of Economic and Social History of the Orient. Today, she has come to present her newly translated monograph on Mughal Emperor Jahangir, which is entitled Consolidating Empire, Power and Elites in Jahangir's India, which was published last year by Permanent Black. And the translation was partly funded by IFI, which is also co-organizing this event this evening. To discuss her work this evening, we are extremely happy to welcome Dr. Anubhuti Maurya, who is Associate Professor and Head of History of the History and Archaeology Department at Shiv Nadar University. Prior to joining Shiv Nadar University, Anubhuti completed her PhD at JNU. She was also a visiting scholar at Columbia University, taught at Bharati College, Delhi University, and then joined Shiv Nadar. She specializes in medieval and early modern India, and particularly on the political history of imperial and regional formations, even more particularly on the history of Kashmir during the Mughal era. She published her work in several journals like EPW and the Journal of Frontier Studies, and is currently working on her monograph on Kashmir in the 16th and 17th century. So this evening, we are delighted to welcome both of them. Let me remind you of the book title presented this evening by Corinne, Consolidating Empire, Power and Elites in Jahangir's India. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurence, for this very kind of introduction, and good evening to everyone. I'm very happy to be here, very grateful to the CSH and Odile, to the IFI and Julia, to Laurence and Joël for hosting me at the seminar, and to Anubhuti, of course, for taking some time to discuss with me. So the book that I'm going to present today, as the title indicates, is very much focused on Jahangir's reign. And it's the result of more than 2 decades of research. It started with my PhD a long time ago. And at that time, and I think it is still valid today, Mughal historiography was by and large mostly about Akbar and Aurangzeb. So, you know, the founding figure of the empire, and then the man who, with whom supposedly the decline started. But the period that came before Akbar, in between Akbar and Aurangzeb, and then after Aurangzeb, was paid much less attention. So initially, the project of the PhD was to re-examine the half century between Akbar and Aurangzeb reign. So that would have meant Jahangir and Shah Jahan. And so, as a good Cartesian, I started from the beginning, and I started reading Jahangir's memoir. And as you know, Jahangir has not the most fantastic reputation where his qualities as a political leader are concerned. And so what really struck me at the start was the huge discrepancy I felt between this received wisdom, which portrayed him as a kind of a lazy, incompetent king, and the sovereign voice I could hear very clearly when reading these memoirs. And I kind of became quite fascinated by this figure. And very quickly it became clear that I would never go beyond 1627, that is the date of Jahangir's death, and that I would never make it into the reign of Shah Jahan. So that's how it all started. And if we could maybe have the next slide, one of my first ambition was to reconsider, explore the reasons behind this so poor received wisdom of Jahangir. And even for those of you who are not that familiar with Mughal history, when you hear the name of Jahangir, I'm pretty sure that the other names that immediately come to your mind are that of Nur Jahan. Could we move backward, please? Yeah. Whom you see, so that Nur Jahan was the favorite spouse of Jahangir. You see her here loading her rifle, so in a very manly posture. And she is said to have had a very mischievous influence over Jahangir, together with the other members of her family. So you see her father on the right, Itimadud-Dawla, who was the Wazir and Vakil of Jahangir during most of his reign, and who was afterwards succeeded by his own son, so Nur Jahan's brother, Asaf Khan. And in most books, you learn how they formed together with Shah Jahan, who married Asaf Khan's daughter, Mumtaz Mahal, so for whom the Taj Mahal has been built, how together they formed some kind of a junta coalition that ruled instead of Jahangir. So another very strong image about him, and if we could move to the next slide, please, is the idea that compared to his father Akbar, Jahangir was a very pale successor whose only merit was to was that he had been able to retain the territorial conquest of Akbar, that he did not touch modified the important imperial reforms that had been enacted by Akbar. And I think that I've chosen these two particular paintings because, according to me, of course, it's a bit caricatural, but they really convey, the contrasting images of the two monarchs. So on my left-hand side, you have a painting portraying the siege of Chittorgarh by Akbar, whom you may see at the bottom left of the painting, who is supervising the military operations, so very actively involved in the military campaigns. And on my right-hand side, you have a painting of Jahangir, who is, for the people in the room, unfortunately, you cannot see Jahangir, but he's basically between me and Anubhuti. And he has actually trouble, thank you, walking into the harem. As you may see, he's supported by two women, so maybe he's drunk, maybe he has had his daily dose of opium or more than that. In any case, he seems to have trouble walking. And so he's coming into the harem to join in the celebration of the Holy Festival. And yeah, I think that this juxtaposition of paintings really conveys quite aptly the contrasting evaluations of both monarchs. And so my first reaction to this received wisdom was to explore the historiographical traditions that gave birth to this great legend about Jahangir. Could we please move forward? So for that, I first took a look at the travelogues or other accounts by the European travelers who went to Jahangir's court, from the Jesuits who were the earliest to have arrived at his court, and who were very disappointed by the fact that eventually he did not convert, which they had very much hoped while he was a prince. Then you have the man portrayed here. So Sir Thomas Roe, the first English ambassador to the court, who, as you may know as well, failed to obtain from Jahangir the commercial privileges he had come to negotiate at the court. So he had a grudge, I would say, against Jahangir, and that also the grudge does not hold true for Francisco Pelsert as well, who came to the empire at the very end of the reign of Jahangir, and who witnessed the court when the struggle for the succession had already started. So who got an image of a declining ruler who had no more agency in what was happening. So that was one historiographical European Orientalist tradition that explains in part this negative image of Jahangir. But when you turn toward the Indo-Persian historiographical tradition, and more specifically to a couple of chronicles that have been composed in the very early years of Shah Jahan, I discovered that these authors, so Kamgar Husseini in the case of the Masiri Jahangiri, or Muhammad Khan in the case of the Irbal Nama. So you come to realize that these two scholars faced quite a serious dilemma when they had to write their history of Jahangir's reign, because they had to justify the rebellion of Shah Jahan against Jahangir, and the way they eventually succeeded to do so was to say that Shah Jahan did not rebel against Jahangir, but against the evil influence of Nur Jahan. And so these two, but when they, in making this argument, they also deprived Jahangir of any political agency. So in a sense, they kind of sacrificed his political reputation. And during the colonial era, and still, also in the post-colonial era, these two European and Indo-Persian traditions, they kind of merged, coalesced to inform the dull image at best of Jahangir that you still find very often in handbooks or even monographs about Jahangir, even though, of course, since the last 2 decades, more attention has been paid to that period. And so once I had clearer ideas about the origins and genesis of this historiographical representation, the next thing I wanted to do, another thing that I wanted to say is that the reason why Jahangir's reign had been paid little attention has to do with these two traditions I just mentioned, but also with the fact that until the late 20th century and the early 21st century, historiography about the Mughal was very much directed toward the building of institutions, fact-oriented, etc. And the fact that Jahangir's reign witnessed no conquest, no administrative reforms, no, all not of any markers that are usually taken into consideration to evaluate the success or failure of a reign. So that also explains, the scant attention has been paid. But on the contrary, I believe that this scant attention is a kind of symptom of the methodological impasse that such historiography, descriptive historiography, has reached in the case of a reign during which, from the traditional perspective, nothing happens. And so I try to argue in the book that, these kind of periods of consolidation, stagnation, which are usually disregarded, it's important to take them into account if you want to have a clearer idea of the evolution of such a large polity as the Mughal Empire was. And so as a result, my book does not propose a linear history of Jahangir's reign, even though it does cover books, a time span corresponding to it. And rather, my purpose has been threefold. One thing was to provide an exhaustive study of Jahangir's imperial discourse, so to say, to recover his voice. And another ambition was to confront these statements and the way Jahangir handled the business of kingship with the wide-ranging political conceptions and practices that coexisted among elite circles, whether these elites were members specialized in military, administrative, or religious activity, and whether or not they were agents of the empire. And last but not least, another point in my agenda was to explore in detail, and if we could move to the next slide, please, was to explore in detail the connectedness of Jahangir's empire, and to highlight the role played by other polities of Muslim Asia, especially the Safavid Iran and the Uzbek Khanate of Central Asia, into the elaboration and implementation of Jahangir's political and ideological agenda. And so to come back to my first task, in a sense, if we could move forward again, next slide. So it had to do with re-examining, reconstructing the discourse of Jahangir, taking into account the traditional sources, texts. And so on the left-hand side, this is the first page of the Jahangirnama, the memoirs of Jahangir. And on the right-hand side, that's a source that have been discovered much later in the early years of the 21st century. And there is only one manuscript. It has been discovered in Lahore, published in Tehran in 2006. And it is a night chronicle of 3 years of Jahangir's reign. So you have, I've looked at texts. Next slide, please. But it was very important to me to take into account as well the material culture of the empire and all kinds of media immobilized in order to make himself heard. So painting. Next slide, please. Architecture. So Akbar's mausoleum in Sikandra. On the right side, that's an Ashokan pillar engraved with Jahangir's name and title. And at the bottom, this is the famous picture wall of the fort of Lahore. So architecture, inscriptions, next slide, please. And metalware as well. So on the you have the golden devotional medals, which have long been considered as portrait moors, that is as a kind of coin, but these are no coins. These are devotional objects that were distributed to the disciples of the emperor. And I have also added to the slide a very common rupee of Jahangir that enunciates his full reign. So recovering, re-examining the imperial discourse was proved to be a challenging task, not only because of the variety of the media he used, but also because of the polyphony and the ambivalence of the voices I heard, sometimes contrasting, sometimes even contradictory within the same medium, the same text, but also across the different media he cultivated. And I'll give you just one instance, his title, his regnal title, which is Nuruddin Jahangir ibn Akbar Pacha. So if you take the three elements of the title, they are all very ambivalent. For instance, take Ibn Akbar Pacha, the son of Emperor Akbar. If you remember that he had rebelled, that Jahangir had rebelled against Akbar, and if you know as well that he's the only one among the Mughal emperors to have systematically signed or engraved, include within his title the fact that he was the son of Akbar, it's puzzling. So it means that at the same time he pictured himself as a continuator to Akbar, and that was very important for him to do so. And at the same time, people knew that he had rebelled against him. Same thing with Jahangir, the world conqueror. We all know, as I said earlier, that Jahangir never embraced the conquest state option that Akbar had favored earlier. But still, so why call himself Jahangir? And the idea of world domination was very important for him, but the conquest, he intended to pursue was not a territorial one. It was more an ideological one, a conquest of opinion among the regional elites within the empire and beyond. And last but not least, Nuruddin, the light of religion. Even today, you find very diverse interpretations vis-à-vis this title. Some argue that in calling himself Nuruddin, which was, by the way, a very common laqab, honorific title, that was, how you say that, that was a sign that he followed in the footsteps of the theory, the illuminationist theory of sovereignty that Abul Fazl, Akbar's friend and ideologue, had elaborated before. Others argue, so that would mean a continuity as well in terms of religious policy, and I'll come to that later. Others interpret it because in some versions you have Nuruddin Muhammad, so the light of the religion of Muhammad, which is quite different. So others interpret that his choice of Nuruddin as a laqab, by contrast, illustrated his will to reorient the religious ideology and policies of the Mughal toward a more conservative Sunni orthodoxy. And in order to, so you see, and that's the reason why I have spent so many years with Jahangir, is that you never know how to position yourself vis-a-vis what he's saying to his audience. And actually, a couple of years ago, another scholar of the Mughal Empire, Afzal Moin, has suggested, in order to contain or make sense of this polyphony, of this ambiguity, he has suggested that Jahangir indeed elaborated two parallel levels of discourse. One that was exoteric and that was conveyed through media targeting a wide audience, and that would be the case for the memoirs. And the other, and so this exoteric discourse would portray Jahangir as a traditional temporal ruler. And the other esoteric discourse was, by contrast, transmitted through a series of media, like the gold medals, and especially painting in general, that were destined to the close associates, the loyalists of the emperor. So that would be an easy solution, and that would, help the historian to make sense of this inward diversity within Jahangir's discourse. The problem is that when you look at the memoirs, at the Majalisi Jahangiri, at the painting, it does not work. And if we could go backward with the slides, with the two paintings, to take just one instance, because I already know I'm late. No, backward again. So Moin argues that for Jahangir, painting was a sacred medium, and that all representations of Jahangir through painting were about his spiritual claims. But look at these two paintings. I mean, during Jahangir's reign, you have, in addition to the illustrations of the Jahangirnama, which amounted to a kind of visual archive of the reign, you have a series of paintings which are mimetic. And from the beginning to the end of the reign, you see the evolution, the aging in the Pacha's face, in his body. So they depict him as a human being who, like every human being, would one day die. And on the other hand, you have that kind of paintings that have been called the allegorical paintings, and which by contrast depict him in a timeless mode as a supernatural being. So painting is not, Jahangir's portraits are not all about sacredness, just as the memoirs are not all about him being a temporal reader. And my argument is to say that to try to subsume this, to contain this polyphony, this ambivalence of Jahangir's voice, is to miss something, because it, according to me, it also has to do with his playfulness, with the wry humor you can feel when you read the Jahangirnama or the Majalisi Jahangiri, and that this polyphony is intrinsically linked to the way he was a king and to his personality. So there is no, he was not a systematic person. So to create a neat divide between these two non-porous levels of discourse is not the good way to go. But anyway, the book is not only about Jahangir, even though he's a central figure of the book. And then what I tried to do in the other parts of the monograph, that is in part 2 and 3, was to look at the way the empire changed under its dispensation. And here I have to go a little bit backward in Akbar's time, and to say things really briefly. You know that the reign of Akbar had been characterized by the continuation or inauguration of a series of empire building dynamics. One was what I've called political cosmopolitanism, that is a kind of a recruitment policy that sought to not rely on any single group, especially the Central Asians, who wanted to remain in the continue in the same prominent position they had enjoyed under the early Mughals. And so this political cosmopolitanism translated into the recruitment of elites from other parts of the Islamic world, from Safavid Iran, obviously, but also from Central Asia, but especially from within South Asia, with the incorporation of men of the sword, like the Rajputs, and of the pen, like the scribal caste of the Kayasht and the Khatri. So that was one important dynamic. The other was the sacralization of the Pacha. I've already said a few words about that, but you know that this sacralization went hand in hand with a specific form of religious universalism, the so-called sulikul, the universal conciliation, according to which, its overarching principle was the spiritual hegemony of the emperor. And for him, every religion had a place in the empire as long as its adherents, including the ulama and Sufis, recognized the superior status of his of the figure of the emperor. And it also went hand in hand with the patronage of non-Muslim figures and institutions, the adoption of a number of non-Muslim rituals, etc., etc. And so these two first dynamics, the political cosmopolitanism and the sacralization of the Pacha, they are signs of a culture of political diversity. But you had also, the ruler Akbar and his successors, they also needed to, define the boundaries between them and the elite, to have a steady flow of revenue, to have the empire working. So Akbar also created a series of so-called systems, like the Mansabdar system, the Jahangir system, etc., which were all meant to make the emperor the whole head of the empire, and to prevent the amirs, so the high-ranking Mansabdars, the ones who have a rank within the apparatus, to build local bases of power. So that's what Akbar transmitted to Jahangir. He did not transmit a perfectly centralized, a perfectly oiled administrative machinery, but he transmitted a toolbox and a balance of power that was in favor of the dynasty, but that had constantly to be renegotiated. So if I now move to the second and third part of the book that deal with, that follow, let's say, a kind of a dialogical approach, in the sense that they both try to reassess Jahangir's policy vis-à-vis the military and administrative elites on the one hand, and on the other hand, the religious elites. But they also, I mean, my purpose was also to take a critical distance from the imperial perspective, and to restore the agency and the perspective of the elites, to recover their voices as well, through a number of texts and of artifacts. And so if we could move to the, not the next, but go on, and I will say stop. Yes, this one. So as you know, again, the historiography about the Mughal nobility had, until the late 20th century, been much about statistical, factual approach, trying to delineate the major forces at play within the empire, but not paying very much attention about the perceptions by this elite of the empire, or the ways they subverted authority outside of the classical rebellions. So my choice was to not follow this path of historiography, and rather to, let's say, follow the path of this kind of page. So this is on the right-hand side. This is a page from one of Jahangir's album, where he collected the portraits of the amirs of his reign. And he added autograph notes under the portraits, either identifying them or commenting on the quality of the painting. And we are very lucky to have a quite important corpus of sub-imperial materials, that is, texts or artifacts that were produced or commissioned by the Amir. And that had so far not really been examined from the perspective of political history. They had been mined for facts about cultural history, so that kind of things. So I worked out my way in the second and in the third part through a series of case studies that were, in my eyes, also very emblematic of the general directions of Jahangir's policy vis-à-vis this elite. So next slide, please. So in the case of the Umara, I particularly focused on representatives of the old and the new Iranian elite. So on the left-hand side, you have Abdurrahim Rani Hanan, the son of Bayram Khan, a Turkmen by origin, who was a very senior member of Jahangir's court. In the center, this is Khanjan Lodi, an Afghan, who became the first Afghan Amir within the Mughal nobility. And on the right-hand side, you have Raja Ramdas Kachwaha. And I also included, but I didn't find a contemporary painting of him, Bir Singh Deo Bundela of Orcha, who also became a major player under Jahangir. And so these three, these three examples are very instructive, because they reveal two major trends of Akbar, of Jahangir's management of the political elites. That is, the fact that his reign did correspond to the rise to power of the Iranians, and for that, Noor Jahan is also a paradigmatic example. And he also, another major trend of his policy was to incorporate within the fold of the empire groups that had heretofore been enemies of the Mughals, and that would be the case of the Afghans, or that had remained in a marginal position within the empire. And if you take the example of Raja Ramdas, he is from a minor lineage within the Kashwara clan. He is not part of the lineage with whom Akbar intermarried. And the Bundelas, I mean, you all know, I think, that they have long been looked down by the Rajputs of Rajasthan. So to promote a Bundela as the first, in terms of rank, Amir, Rajput Amir of the empire was something important. And so every one of these figures commissioned text or temples or palaces that also are very instructive, where the perception of these nobles by these nobles of the empire and is concerned. And what is very interesting is that the incorporation within the kingdom rarely translated into a radical acculturation. And what you see at work is rather a process of selective appropriation from the royal model. And in all the texts I've looked at, you very clearly see their dual identity as a mansabdar, so as an agent of the empire, and as a clan leader, let's say that. And how another question I wanted to raise was also there, how Jahangir was portrayed in this text. And there are basically two modes of representation. He's depicted as the ultimate patron of the community, or he may be also assimilated to local figures of kingship, like it is the case such as is the case in the Braj historical poems that have been commissioned by Bir Singh Deo, where you see him being assimilated to Rama, for instance. And so that in all these instances, I haven't found any trace of ideological opposition to the empire. But what I mean, this doesn't mean that these amirs did not try to go their own way within the political structure. And actually, they all tried to increase their power despite the imperial regulations that had been implemented since the time of Akbar. So in a sense, the reign of Jahangir is a success of the past that had been opened by Akbar, in as much as there were no open Amiri revolts during his reign, but it also very clearly shows the limits of Mughal, that the actual power the Mughals were able to exercise. And basically, I came to the same conclusions where the religious elites are concerned. And for this last part of the book, I followed the same methodology, going through case studies, and again, re-examining the religious policy of the Mughals under Jahangir, because in that case, I mean, in this domain as well, when you talk about Mughals plus religion, again, you have Akbar religious tolerance, openness, and then you have Aurangzeb, discrimination against Hindus. But what happened in between? You read very often that Akbar's tolerance began to deteriorate under Jahangir, but why, how, that remains a mystery. So could we go to the next slide, please? What I did was to re-examine the dispensation of Jahangir under this slide, and in most cases, I think that we can say without doubt that he followed in the footsteps of Akbar, for example, in giving pride of place to the Chishtiya. And so on the left-hand side, this is the Ajmer Dargah of Muinuddin Chishti. The same holds true for the Krishnaites of the Mathura Vrindavan area. It's also valid for, you know, the famous encounters between Jahangir and the ascetic Jadrup, whom Akbar had previously met. And you may see depicted here one of these discussions. And it also holds true in my eyes to more so-called marginal communities such as the Jain and the Sikhs. So you have Guru Arjan depicted in an 18th century painting, and then on the right side, a letter of invitation by Jain monks celebrating the concessions Jahangir had just agreed to give them. And as you probably know, normally the image of Jahangir vis-à-vis the Sikh in particular is that he was the one who started to persecute Sikhs. But I mean, if you look at the contemporary text, there is no hard evidence documenting that, and it is an idea that emerged only much later in the 18th century sources of the Sikh community. And on the other hand, when you look at what Akbar positioning vis-à-vis the Sikh, generally it is described as he gave them land, he patronized them. But again, if you go back to the contemporary materials, it's not there. So you have to take a distance from the received wisdom about Akbar universal so-called religious tolerance, and in order to better understand what happened under Jahangir. Because Sulikul, universal conciliation, never meant for the Pachas an equal treatment of all religious communities within the empire. There was always, from the very start, silsilas or communities that were more favored than others. And so that was part of my argument. And then again, I picked up three. The ideal would have been to have evidence of religious elites talking about Mughal dispensation under Jahangir, not only from within the fold of Islam, but beyond. And you have that kind of text for Akbar's time. But unfortunately, from what I have seen, that's not the case for Jahangir's reign. So I focused this, going through the other side of the mirror. I was able to do that only for the Muslim Sufis and ulama. And as a result, I focused on three figures. Next slide, please. Some of them are pretty well known. So on the left, this is the Dargah of Abdul Haq Muhaddis Dilavi. a traditionalist and moderate revivalist who is buried in Delhi in the Mehrauli area. In the center, you have two folios from the Maktubat of Sheikh Ahmad Sirindi, very well known, who was a Mujadid, a renewer, whose messianism competed with that of Jahangir, so from the Naqshbandi order. And on the right-hand side, this is the Dargah of Abdurrahman Chishti in Awad, where he lies buried. And these three figures are actually very interesting because all of them spent a number of years at Akbar's or Jahangir's court between the late 1580s and the 1610s. So they all had an occasion to witness firsthand the intellectual and religious atmosphere of the court. And whether this exposure was a factor in their decision to address in their writings the social religious conditions of the time, I don't know, but they are among the few Sufis of the time to have addressed such questions in their writings. And last but not least, another interesting reason why, another reason why I picked them up is the fact that they very clearly illustrate the reaction and the repositioning of the religious elites vis-a-vis the new trends inaugurated by Jahangir. What were these reactions? On the one hand, and it started at the end of Akbar's reign, one was about opposition and discontent vis-a-vis the spiritual claims of the Mughals and their religious policy, inclusive religious policy. And actually the discontent had reached such a degree in the last years of Akbar that Jahangir capitalized on this discontent and he enjoyed the support of this conservative, neoconservative ulema and Sufi in the competition for the throne. And afterwards, during his reign, he never stopped trying to conciliate them. And I think that this is one of the reasons why you have this image of him starting a reorientation of the Mughals towards Sunni orthodoxy. But what this image ignores is the fact that at the same time, he also continued the Sulikul policy of his father. He continued to present himself as a Mahdi, as a saint of the age. He continued to patronize non-religious figures, non-Muslim religious figures and institutions. So he was very much within the line that had been defined by Akbar. But what he did was to change the communication strategy. You know that Akbar had his spiritual claims engraved, in a sense, in the last official chronicle of the reign, the Akbarnama. Jahangir witnessed the results, which were not good, and he changed strategy. That's why, according to me, you have so little within the Jahangirnama about the Sufi royal order, about his spiritual claims that were, displayed, conveyed through a series of media, whether text, and that's the case with the Majalisi Jahangiri, or paintings or medals that were only accessible to a small elite. And so the reaction of the ulama and Sufi under Jahangir and to his repositioning was twofold. On the one hand, you had Sufis like the Muhaddis or Sirindi, who in the early years of the reign praised Jahangir before again resenting his policy and saying that the least that he could do was to reintroduce legal discrimination between Muslim and non-Muslims. And in a sense, what I've just, the communication strategy I have just described may be seen as a sign of the fact that Jahangir somewhat yielded to this pressure by the neoconservative Sufis and ulama. And on the other hand, you had Sufis, first among them Chishtis, who rallied to support the religious policies of the Mughals. And these policies had taken inspiration from also the perspective, the Weltanschauung of these Sufis, of their interest, curiosity vis-a-vis the Hindu environment within which they lived in. So you have these two major trends of reaction among this group of people. And I think I will stop with that because probably I've talked too much. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Corinne. And I think we all appreciated your capacity to summarize a 600-page book with such clarity. I will now let Dr. Anubhuti Maurya discuss this work, and then we will open the floor to questions.
I must begin by congratulating Corinne on this wonderful book, both for the writing of it and for pursuing the difficult task of translating it into English. For this latter, I'm especially grateful. Over the last 15 years, works in South Asia produced in academies outside of India have not found their way into our bookshops or our libraries. Aggravating, as you can well imagine, the inequalities of the knowledge economy. So I'm very glad to be reading this book in English and to be able to hold it in my hand in some time. And for the fact that our students and researchers will also have access to it. This is a big book. And of course, the sheer size of it is just one part of it. For a very long time after reading some of the early articles that Corinne wrote, if anybody asked me about Jahangir, I would say the only person who's saying intelligent thing about Jahangir is Corinne. And I'm very glad to see, one, a movement forward from those early writings, and also to see the substantial work that you have done. When I say that it's a big book, there are various ways in which I could define that. Just one part of it is the archives. Jahangir has been, as Corinne has written in the prologue of the book, somebody who historians have looked at fairly lightly. He's always been seen as a postscript to his, to the reign of his great father. And part of that has to do with the fact that there haven't been these big fat court chronicles that we can sink our teeth into. There isn't 3 volumes of Akbarnama, 3 volumes of the Ain-e-Akbari, 3 volumes of Tabqat-e-Akbari, 3 volumes of Muntakhab-ut-Tawarikh. No. He decided to represent his own reign. And somehow that doesn't work for historians. He didn't write enough, not good enough. But Corinne's work is remarkable for the extent of the archives she has delved into. And we are not talking only about a very close reading of Jahangir-Nama and the newly published Majalis-e-Jahangiri, but also the corpus of what she calls the sub-imperial texts, whether they are in Farsi or they are in Braj, Awadhi, Rajasthani, the series of texts, which are, they are Tariq texts, they are Charitas, the range of texts that she has looked at. And it's like every aspect of kingship and conversation around it that could be chased down an archival path has been done in this book, and that's very impressive. But the other part of it is that, Jahangir is somebody we've thought of as this drunk, romantic man. He liked painting, he liked garden. But the the corpus of visual material and the material produced from Jahangir's court has been the domain of art historians. It has been the domain that we say, this is not proper history, this is art history. What I liked particularly is the way these varieties of archives were woven into one story by Corinne, and I can imagine how difficult it is. And I'm so happy to see, so happy to see an alternate reading to the Moin reading of Jahangir, and the use of the visual and the distinction you made between the mimetic and the allegorical. It is a very useful way also of thinking about the other forms of visual archives we have from the Mughal court. And this is it's just the starting point of how that book works. For me, Jahangir, I'm a historian of the Mughal Empire, but I'm a historian of Kashmir. So the way I came to Jahangir was through this story, which was that, if you start reading on Kashmir, you'll say, oh, Kashmir, it's paradise on earth. And Jahangir laid out all these gardens, and he and Noor Jahan used to hold hands and walk under the chinar trees in these gardens. And really, people don't even feel embarrassed writing. And saying this about historians writing from about, 1800s. As somebody who has to read the descriptions of the gardens, it used to irritate me no end. But the story about Jahangir's death is when Jahangir in his last days decided to visit Kashmir. And he died, as he would, in the most inconvenient spot on the road back from Kashmir to Lahore, like the narrowest pass, the most inconveniently placed stop. He decides to die there. And the story we have of him is Jahangir was asked with his dying breath, what is your last desire? And he said, Kashmir digar hech, Kashmir and nothing else. Right? It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And it's made into a poem by Mullah Tugra, who's a poet in Shah Jahan's court. And the first time I read it, I was like, oh, Kashmir digar hech. I'm looking up dictionary to see what digar means, what hech means. Working your way through. But at some point of time, the historian kicks in and says, what about the rest of Jahangir? Right? What about his body? He is, dying on the road, on the hill. What about the rest of his body? But the thing is that if you have Kashmir digar hech composed into a beautiful couplet, nobody needs to ask that. And if that is the story that does the round, and it does the round from Shah Jahani court, nobody needs to worry about what happened to the rest of Jahangir and how did Shah Jahan get to the throne. One of Corinne's early articles was about how the historiography or the image of Jahangir, the romantic, the drunk, but also the man who gave over reins of power to Noor Jahan, started getting built from the Shah Jahani text. And this work of excavating the way that history itself gets written, not excavating the idea, is it true Jahangir was like this? Is it true that he ate so much opium? Is it true he drank so much? No, that's not the history. The historical part of it is the genealogy of that image. How was it written about by the Shah Jahani text? How was it written about by the people writing in the decades after Jahangir? How was it written about by the travelers in the court in those years, the travelers in the court in the years after that? And then to bring it down to the 19th century, to place it in the context of writings of, the colonial empire, which has a conflicted relationship with the Mughal Empire. That exercise of excavation is what actually makes a work like this really. So when I say archives, it's not just archives in the sense of, oh, she's looked at all the material from Jahangir's period, but also thought very seriously about how our knowledge, how our image of that emperor that we popularly hold today get built. Now, this is a work of political history. It's a history of the Mughal Empire through the person of the emperor and the royal court. Now, in other circumstances, as a historian of the region, I have serious discomfort with the sheer premise from which this history gets written. I have to say, Corinne convinces me, but that is something that is fundamental to the approach of history writing that's there. But this work is not only a biography of the emperor. It's a history of the court and the history of the empire told from the court as a set of political relationships and a set of political claims. Now, Jahangir, because he has this strong authorial voice that speaks out at us from the memoirs, from the Jahangirnama, is often presented as this exceptional figure from his age. You know, we can hear him. And he's kind of cute, you know, he'll say things like, oh, today I was very good. I only had 2 glasses of wine. Yesterday I was not so good. I had 4, but today I was good with the wine, not so good with the opium. He's rather cute in the way he writes about himself. But the thing is that as an exceptional figure, this constant reading of this person as an exceptional figure, and which is ironic because he's also not the, you know, he's not the greatest guy as far as historians are concerned, but this reading of him as an exceptional figure, what it does is it papers over the idea of the space of the court as the space where political contests are taking place, where actually power is evolving and authority is being shaped through the practices of the court. So while you know, there's Jahangir on the cover and the book is about you know, it places him at the center of the story, the book is as much about the idea of the court as a site of political contestation, claim making, exercise of authority. And as she said herself, Corinne illustrates the making of kingship in the practices, actions, and words of the king. At the same time, and again I come back to this working with the sub-imperial archive, but also characters. You know, the Abdur Rahim Khane Khane Jahan Lodi, Ramdas, about whom I haven't reminded to tell you the interesting story from Akbar's court. But most interestingly, a figure like Bir Singh Bundela. And she shows through the book the making of the Mughal Imperium, the different languages of politics that are spoken in it, and the making and the spread of political authority. Right? So even though the emperor is the heart of the book, there is a way in which the actual politics of the court is worked out through other figures who are part of the ruling elite. And for me as a historian, it's these inchoate elements which appear in this long history of the empire. They become coherent when when they're seen from this position of diversity of political claims within a pan-regional empire, and which is what the bringing out and engaging with the words of these sub-imperial people that the work actually does. It makes sense of, like, Bir Singh Bundela is not somebody who makes any sense. If you no, it doesn't make any sense till I read this, right? But it does. He doesn't, as a figure who appears, you know, and also because there's a Kashmir connection with the Bundelas. When you see these different figures from the empire, from different parts of the empire, and they're engaging with each other across these different texts, and these figures then just, you know, they kind of appear. It's when they are placed within this narrative in this particular book of a political engagement or of claim making or exercise of authority that it made sense. In the last 25 years, there's been a significant move in Mughal historiography in general. One, you know, what has been the tradition has been to think of the empire through the institutions and structures of governance. And these are, you know, the revenue system, the army, the nobility. The recent work of Alam Subramaniam on the textual and literary, to Ebacok, to name just one, on artistic production, I would actually, and maybe controversially, still place within this particular institutional approach. The other has been to think of the empire as a process, and more succinctly described by Farhat Hassan as a process of everyday negotiation. If I was to place Corinne's work within this larger, these two large trends within Mughal historiography, she would very much be within what is the traditional approach. It's not a work which is looking at the process or empire as a process. And there is, the use of the words or the discussion around the question of centralization, the idea of integration, assimilation, and even what is in the title of the book, the idea of consolidation. There is a stress on the idea of the empire as a set of institutions, and even the foray that you make, especially visibly spelled out with Abdul Rahim Khana, where culture is domain of power, where culture is a form of how the domain of culture is a way in which the power of that particular noble is exercised. And here is one of the first questions I have to this work. One is that there is the idea of universalism, which is spelled out quite well, especially in the discussion around Sulekul. But there is also a constant reference to cosmopolitanism within the empire. And I noticed that in the last part, when you are describing the last part of your book, the question of Sulekul is seen as a part of the policy of political cosmopolitanism, as a policy of recruitment. The idea of cosmopolitan now is coming up repeatedly in South Asian historiography, whether it is with reference to Sheldon Pollock's idea of the Sanskrit cosmopolis, or we think of what people are beginning to call the Persianate cosmopolis, the idea of the cosmopolis. The fact that it's a pan-regional empire, the fact that it's an empire that spans a large part of a subcontinent, the fact that it's an empire with diversity also means that the road to bringing these elements together in the court are marked by conflict. And these conflicts are not just in the form of diverse political claims and the way they're being negotiated through having Watan Jahangir, but the everyday proceedings of the court, the everyday existence of a court are marked by these conflicts and alienation, which when we move our gaze away from the center, become visible. So when the Kashmiris, for example, or when the Bundelas first come to court, this whole idea that so-and-so is not taken seriously, is insulted, faces humiliation, falls ill, dies suddenly under mysterious circumstances, what you have in the everyday of the court is a conflict between the languages of politics and the paramountcy or the suzerainty of the emperor. So if the idea of sovereignty as distinct from paramountcy of power, in trying to understand that kingship and then to look upon the question of cosmopolitanism. So I find cosmopolitan not a very useful term while thinking of the Mughal Empire. Diversity works quite well. But the fact that the idea of Sulekul is existing alongside these everyday conflicts, these everyday frictions, and the alienation of the ruling groups who are losing power across the empire and their negotiations. The other questions that I would have about the book, various aspects of the book. One I am most interested in is the idea that you say this when you start discussing Jahangir Nama, which is that the emperor in your work is a position that signifies a set of political actors. To think of the emperor not as an individual alone, but within the emperor also a set of political actors. Just as you established the memoir, the Jahangir Nama is a work of collegial interaction. So this is something that I would like you to speak more about. And do you think that would explain the near invisibility of Noor Jahan from Jahangir Nama, that she's not seen as a distinct entity, but is incorporated into the personhood of the emperor. So that's, I don't know if, I mean, I'm trying to make sense of the absence of Noor Jahan from Jahangir Nama. The second question I had was, in an earlier article, and especially when read alongside Abercock's work, there was a strong argument for the ideal of Solomon as the dominating frame for Jahangir's kingship. Now, while you've referred to it in the book, you do not make a strong case for it. So I was wondering, have you moved away from that argument, and in what way? The third is, what is the, so we have the emperor, we have how the emperor is written about, but what about the country that he rules over? What about the idea of Hindustan? So, we've had a conversation in the book on the emperor, on the networks around the emperor, the networks that the court represents, different factions, individuals, different ruling groups coming together. But somehow there is the idea of the territory of the empire and where that territory is and what that is, what is Hindustan for Jahangir, is not something that. So if there is a possibility of that conversation, and it's very interesting because when you move from Mansingh and Khusro to Abdur Rahim Khane Khana, you actually see that with Akbar, what opens up in terms of Hind is Bengal, right? It is the North Indian plain that opens up with Akbar. Whereas with Jahangir, by the time we reach Jahangir, what is opening up and what is becoming far closer to the heart of the empire is Deccan. So the seamlessness of the Indo-Gangetic plain is what, by the end of Akbar's reign, that's the Hindustan that's so clearly defined. But it is with Jahangir that Deccan becomes, and maybe explains part of the later history, maybe explains, Shah Jahan's Burhanpur stay, explains Aurangzeb's obsession. But the idea that there is a Hind and there is a moving locus within that Hind is something that develops to my mind, in Jahangir's reign, and to my mind, it is also something that is constitutive of his kingship. Yeah, okay. So I have some other questions, but my really, my last question and the most burning question of all is, what exactly is the story of Jahangir's dead body?
So because we have actually, it is already getting a bit late, what I suggest, I mean, these are all very important questions, and I'm sure that Corinne would want to take time to answer them. And we have little time left. So what I suggest, if you both agree with this, is that we take a round of questions alongside, and that will be a very difficult task for you, Corinne, but basically you can try to address them briefly, and then we can continue with the conversation also at the book launch, if you do not mind, just to make sure that also people who are in the room and people who are online also get a chance to ask their questions. I will just please, everyone who's in the room and online, please make sure that you ask brief questions so that we have a chance to take more than 1 or 2 questions. We'll start with a question in the chat. Okay, that's not a question. Okay, that makes things easier in a way. Really an eye-opener. Thank you for this comment. Okay, Dr. Ruchika Sharma, you have switched on your video. Would you like to ask a question?
No, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to sort of, I joined in much later, so I think I'll wait for others to ask the questions I probably might have. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you very much. So we'll ask questions here. If someone in the room wants to ask a question, please make sure that you switch on the mic or get close to one. So we'll take maybe 3 questions to start with, and then we will see how much we can manage.
Really interesting, and I'm you've made a very strong case for Jahangir as a sovereign, a naturalist, and an aesthete as well. And When you showed those slides, and two of the images struck me as the first is the holy scene, which you showed, where he's in the harem with playing holy, and the second one is where there are two portraits of Jahangir, one a sketch and the other a painting. Um, the second, I assume, was commissioned by Jahangir, but the first one, was it also commissioned by him? The holy scene in the harem? Yeah, because it doesn't fit in with the kind of image he's portraying. But the second image where he's as a sovereign, what I found very interesting is that there is right next to him, there is a wine decanter and a glass of wine very prominently positioned in the painting, and no other sort of symbol of sovereignty, you know, other than the globe and the what is the significance that he wanted that in the frame, because he was quite I think meticulous about the allegorical meanings in his paintings. That's for now. Thank you.
So I can see that there's a question online. I think there was a question behind me. Can you please? So the Shamal Takar, we will of course let you speak, but we'll first let the person in the room. First, can you introduce yourself and then ask the question?
Yeah. So I'm Gunjan Malhotra, a scholar from DU. So thank you so much, ma'am, for such an engaging talk. I just wanted to ask something about the Majalis-e-Jahangiri. I wanted to ask that this text focuses about the esoteric nocturnal assemblies. So there are also instances when the excerpts from the text are also included into the Jahangir Nama, which is much of a public discourse text. And we also see that there is a mingling of both sorts of texts. So if there was such a mingling, how Majalis-e-Jahangiri managed to portray itself as an exclusive esoteric discourse, and how you see Majalis as a space? Thank you.
Thank you. Shamal Takar, if you want to ask your question, can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we could hear you, but now we can no longer hear you.
I just wanted to thank for the very informative session, and I just wanted to get one help if you people can guide. The way she has referred the book, Majalise Jahangir Nama, I am similarly looking for a book, Jalal-e Jang Nama. If someone can help me source it out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will see if Corinne can help you with this. Maybe we can take one more question in the room, if there is any for the time. Well, I think you probably have enough questions to answer. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, ma'am, for this enriching session. I'm Neeraj Kumar, working on Raja Man Singh, and I'm looking him through the vernacular sources. But when I was coming across to understand Jahangir and Man Singh and their relation, I have also found one primary source which was related to Ramdas Kachwaha, and it was Khyat Pathal Pota, and it is in Khudabak's library, Patna. And if we look for the original source, Jaipur state won't allow to look into the original source. But there are some ambiguities in the copy which is in Khudabak's library. So how you have used that source into your research? When I was looking for this, my supervisor was saying ki we have not that much authoritative language or the content in the text. And I would like to ask one more question in it, ki how you see Man Singh and Jahangir and how they were treating each other. So if you can elaborate, please do. Thank you.
Okay, so now now the hard task of answering these many questions. You may not be able to answer all of them right now. And as I said, you know, there is time after this session to continue this conversation. Thank you.
First, thanks for all these fascinating questions. So I'll try to be brief. So to Anubhuti, does the collective character of the writing of the Jahangir explain Nur Jahan's absence. That's, first of all, it's not a total absence, but it's true that she's really very fragmentary present in the text, and it is, I have no clear answer to your question. I don't know, because in the Jahangir you have allusions to Nur Jahan. You don't have any in the Majalisi Jahangiri, but which is explainable because it's earlier. But one interesting thing, when I was in Lahore last week, I discussed with a colleague from LUMS, and he said that he discovered in the Punjab University Library a Masnavi about Jahangir and Nur Jahan, which I had no idea it existed so far. So that may be an interesting source to look at. But what to say is also that, I mean, this absence of comments about his private amorous life does contrast with the stand of Babur in this domain. But I don't see why, even there is this collective dimension of the writing, you still have the autograph copy. So that has not been, that could not be edited in a sense. So yeah, I'm not sure. About Eba's Solomonic argument, no, I don't think that I just fully embrace it because I think it's very useful and highlighting to work within that Solomonic paradigm. It makes lots of things clear. I had not the impression to move away from it. About the idea of Hindustan under Jahangir, I think it's very present. Actually, the article I wrote on the Majalis about that, about Iran, Turan, and Hindustan is about this, the perception and representation of these different territorial, political, territorial, and cultural entities. But it's not, it's present vis-a-vis, it's expressed vis-a-vis other foreign polities, we would say, but not so much articulated vis-a-vis the diverse regions of what we call today India. And the frontiers are never, the frontiers are moving. But what I want to add to what you have said is that Deccan was already frontier under Akbar. I mean, he was the one who conquered Khandesh. So there was Bengal and there was Deccan already, and it, I mean, the same, it remained the same frontier zone under Jahangir. So the glass of wine in Jahangir's painting, actually, I don't remember exactly. Maybe I don't know if we can come back to the PowerPoint, but in it, so I don't remember the exact appearance of the wine in this particular painting. But one of my argument is that what have been interpreted so far as a glass of wine is generally not a glass of wine, but the Jamid Jamshid. So that is the cup, which, so the legendary king Jamshid, where the entire world is reflected. So that's just one other symbol of universal power, along with the globe, along with the nimbus. So that's my interpretation. So about the Majalisi Jahangiri conveying being the esoteric level of the imperial discourse, it is very much so, because as you know, Abdul Sattar presents the author presents the book as a manual for the disciple of Jahangir, and it's modeled after the Malfuzat of Nizamuddin Auliya. So it is very, very much embedded within this Sufi paradigm. But on the other hand, it's not only about being the saint of the age, etc. And the routine exercise of power is also at work within the Majalis-e Jahangiri. So that's a polymorphous text, just as the Jahangirnama is, but still it's more oriented with all these, oniric accounts of Jahangir, of his encounters with God in various forms. So it's much more oriented toward spirituality than the Jahangirnama is, and it's very, the fragments we have within the Majalis-e Jahangiri, like when Jahangir said, "Oh, you missed the session last night, so you'll have to ask so and so to tell you what happened, so that you could include it within the Majalis-e Jahangiri." Yeah, and by contrast, and ask Khan Azam and Intimadud-Daula, who are also in charge of supervising the writing of the Jahangirnama, about what you've missed, and also what happens in the Diwani Khas, because you asked something, I think a question about the space. So the space is the private hall of audience, which is a different space from the one in which the Jahangirnama takes place, which is the empire at large, and more often than not, the Diwani Am rather than the Diwani Khas. And so, last question about Rajaman Singh. I did use the Patal Pota, but I used it. You were very generous in saying that I use sources in Sanskrit and Braj and other vernacular language, but that is not true. I relied on translation and the work of other scholars like Alison Booth, Cynthia Talbot, Heidi Powells, etc. So I read the Patal Pota through the translation. I might be wrong, but you have also the BPM. Yeah. No, book. Yes. I think I have gone to the same article. But maybe it was published because there are two texts translated within with the book. Actually, I also yeah, so maybe, and I know that the text is a later one, that it's kind of dubious, but still, I thought it was very interesting to mobilize it, especially to explain, and it's not, the Patal Pota is not the only evidence we have of Jahangir's positioning, of his, disgracing Rajaman Singh, and the role that Raja Ramdas played within this, disgracing of Rajaman Singh is very, very interesting, I think. And to read the Jahangirnama, the Akbarnama, and the Patal Pota together really helped me to make sense of Jahangir's policy vis-à-vis this major lineage of the Kashwara.
So thank you, Corinne, for answering all these questions. We have to close the session because it's already getting quite late, but I would like to thank once again, so of course, Corinne Lefèvre and Abuti Moria for presenting this book and discussing it with such clarity. I'm happy to announce our next seminar, which will be on 3rd April. Mary E. John will come to present her book entitled Child Marriage in an International Frame, a Feminist Review from India. You're all welcome, of course, to join us on 3rd April. In the meantime, thank you again for joining us, and we'll discuss, we will have more time to discuss all the points that have been raised here. at the small reception, which is organized by IFI just outside the conference room. Thank you.